Aerosol geoengineering looks like it is so cheap that the cost is basically not going to be an issue. That means that implementation decisions will be risk-to-risk decisions. The risk of doing it against the risk of not doing it. And it makes the problem of how we govern it fundamentally harder and different and novel. But I think the more we do research, the less easy this will look, the more complicated the environmental effects will look. And that's a good thing, because right now it looks too easy. So I think that if we do more research, we're likely to find out that it's harder and more complicated than we thought, and that the side effects are harder to manage. Of course, the opposite reaction is possible. It's an empirical question how people will actually react to knowledge about this. Another reaction is to say, if these crazy scientists are so concerned about putting CO2 in the atmosphere, they want to think about these things, then that might actually mean we should be more serious about the risks of CO2 in the atmosphere. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids. And by the way, it's not really a moral hazard, it's more like free riding on our grandkids.
Numerous air quality studies, including from CARB, California Air Quality Resource Board, have named submicron-sized particulates as being particularly harmful for human respiration. Through all the discussions today, I have not heard any mention of this fallout, and has this been studied, and also the effects of a highly reactive metal like aluminum on toxifying soils and waters?
The collaborators of mine working on the aerosol scheme are actually folks from Carnegie Mellon who focused on human health impacts. And while we haven't published it, that was the very first thing we did, was do the order of magnitude calculation in level pencil and paper, but with an expert on human health impacts about whether there could be an issue. And for aluminum or other particles, there are a lot of toxicological things that need to get looked at seriously.
Geoengineers now are moving very quickly to get legislation passed to spray the primary ingredients into our sky, knowing the damage that we have had not only to human health, we've seen aluminum-related illnesses go through the roof, but what free-form aluminum oxide does to our environment is devastating. And it literally destroys crops, it destroys forests, it destroys our Earth. We have an Earth that is being molested. Our ozone layer is being shredded from top to bottom.
Chemtrails change the amount of sunlight and energy that pierces the atmosphere. I mean, it's in several articles that I can show you. So the phenomena of changing how much sun gets and energy gets into our atmosphere that heats it up is printed every day. It's just printed in such a way as to not say this is a tool for climate change. It's saying it is in fact a phenomena that will in fact change the climate by reducing the amount of sun that gets into our atmosphere. Geoengineering is one of the things that are on the table, and it'll probably be on a large enough scale that it'll be pretty obvious to everybody.
In the fall of 1998, I was asked by my employer, Environment News Service, a worldwide wire service dealing with environmental issues, to have a look at a VHS videotape. When I viewed the tape, I started laughing, frankly. I thought, here's an hour and 10 minutes of shaky video footage of contrails. After 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, I stopped laughing, because as a former pilot and ocean navigator, I was well familiar with normal contrails, and what I was seeing on this videotape was not acting like a normal condensation trail. The trails coming out behind multiple airplanes, instead of dissipating, were lingering, spreading across the sky until a blue sky day had turned into a murky overcast. In my first story for Environment News Service in January 1999, I said that these mysterious contrails were sickening Americans. The illness patterns coincided precisely with so-called heavy spray days, particularly on weekends. People would see this gritting, unusual activity, aerial activity in the sky. They would start to cough, they would get asthma attacks, severe enough to send them to emergency rooms. Doctors were telling the New York Times, we've never seen anything like this. People were dying in great numbers in the early days of this project, and the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, went on record and said, we really don't know what this is. It's not the flu. They called it an epidemic of mortalities. That was their phraseology for this.
When is this?
This is 98, 99, and 2000, the winter months. This was reported in the United States, Canada, in Peterborough, Ontario, The hospital there had 307 acute asthma admissions in a single day. In Birmingham, England, 8,000 people died in 3 weeks, mostly elderly. It was in all the papers, BBC. They were using meatpacking trucks as portable morgues. It was very drastic. All I can say as a journalist is this was coincident to videotape and visual reports of tic-tac-toe patterns and unusual gridding in the sky. They exactly coincided. So very dangerous program. So I'm hopeful that as the discussion enlarges around geoengineering and the public is invited to enter the debate or enters it regardless, that chemtrails will be brought out of the closet, will be brought forward, and that the chemtrail community, the movement, can enter this discussion, and I would suggest, first of all, by dropping the word chemtrails. It's become a poisoned word, and we can use it as code among ourselves, for the media, for the public. We use the words of the scientists of the international debate. We call it stratospheric aerosols, which is what they are. We call it SRM, solar radiation management. We call it geoengineering. We call it climate engineering. All of those are accepted scientific terms. If we can do that, we can bring this whole chemtrails discussion into the broader discussion of geoengineering and finally have a public influence on a very dangerous program.
So about 2004 is when I really started my investigation as to what could be happening in the skies above, because it was too inconsistent. One day would be a grid pattern, and another day would be virtually nothing, with very similar atmospheric conditions. I've been studying meteorology since the late 90s as well. So clearly there was something happening, and it took no time at all to come to the geoengineering issue and a mountain of data. I researched the subject of geoengineering, which seemed to describe exactly what I was seeing in the skies above, which was solar obscuration. That's the primary goal of SAG, Stratospheric Aerosol Geoengineering, and SRM, Solar Radiation Management. The primary goal of these patents, like stratospheric welsbach seeding for reduction of global warming, is a primary patent, and the stated goal is to block the sun. And quite clearly that's what was happening with my solar PV system. So seeing the first ingredient in that patent is aluminum, I began to do rain tests. First test was 7 parts per billion, which according to a hydrogeologist was already quite high, given my location, a filtered forested location. It's not near any sort of industry, urban setting, anything. Subsequent tests over the next 5 years escalated as much as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum in a single rain test. So if you have virtually every dot connecting, and we know these materials aren't coming from China, that's the first thing many people state, but California Air Quality Resources Board has done studies on the aerosols from China, and aluminum simply is not amongst them. Metals don't float across oceans with the exception of mercury. Global dimming is a term most are not familiar with, and the latest figures show fully 20% of the sun's direct rays that reached the planet several decades ago no longer do. I mean, this is the biggest elephant in the room, absolutely the biggest in the room. And I believe that if it could be brought to a level where there was enough cover for all the scientists, all the meteorologists, all the biologists, all the academia that knows this is going on, I believe they would pour from every corner. I do, but they would have to have the cover, because I know people with California Department of Fish and Game that are absolutely beside themselves that this is going on.
Geoengineers are proposing spraying 10 to 20 million tons of toxic aluminum and other substances into our sky for the stated goal of cooling our planet.
So let me distinguish these two different kinds of geoengineering as clearly as I can. So the first one is we call solar radiation management, and that's the idea that you could put mostly reflective particles or other means to make the Earth whiter.
Weather is part of our planet, it's part of our nature. Weather drives everything. Weather drives all of our food. So yeah, weather is creation. It's part of creation, and many people call that God. And people who play with our weather or control our weather are playing God because they want power. Yeah, you control the weather, you control the planet.
The IPCC is the organization within the WMO, and that's the international organization dealing with weather. And it basically says the climate change is human-caused and will have impacts on us now, and those impacts will become more and more significant over time.
I believe the data shows very clearly for anyone who truly does objective research that although they can cool regions, very large regions, temporarily, and of course toxically, the overall effect is a much worsened warming.
The real issue in chemtrails is what causes them to be persistent. And I don't know that answer yet. But if you can cause a contrail to be consistent, that is persistent, that is to stay out in the atmosphere longer, so it can create a cloud. What is the mechanism for that? What has changed in that jet to cause the contrail behind it to persist as opposed to dissipate? Is that a natural phenomenon because we have more moisture in the air? Is it a natural phenomenon because the stratosphere is getting colder? Is it an additive that they put to jet fuel? Is it truly a chemical that they spray with the jet afterwards? I don't know. But the very term persistent contrail is used so as to indicate it's different from a contrail. So my question is, what's the additive? What got added to cause it to be persistent? So do I think there's persistent contrails in the sky? Yes. On a clear day, you can go up and look at them. Anybody who wants to look at them can see them. They're not short streams of cloud-like things you can see. They're very long. They go from horizon to horizon. So there isn't a question of what they are, or are they in existence? They are. The literature talks about it, including the IPCC. So the word persistent contrail is in the scientific documents where they're observing phenomena.